Hi, my name is Shaylin Hayes-Raymond, and I'm the director of the International Misophonia Foundation. I am also an LCT-C in New Brunswick, Canada, and I have a Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology. And these were the housekeeping notes for the live event. This video is actually re-recorded afterwards for the on-demand portion and will not have a Q&A period. If you do have any questions, please email shaylin@misophoniafoundation.com. And due to a cancellation, Amber was unable to make her presentation. So instead, we had coping skills for couples in relationships with myself as a second presentation. We also have misophonia and chronic illness with Sharon Burns and coping with misophonia while traveling with Scott Wright. And thank you so much for being here. Your donation helps us with our mission and goals. And if you are in the USA, you may use your receipt as a tax-deductible receipt. So what is the International Misophonia Foundation, otherwise known as the IMF? There we go. The International Misophonia Foundation is dedicated to serving the needs of individuals and families impacted by misophonia through increasing ethical, accurate, and educational resources for researchers, institutions, policymakers, and individuals and families impacted by misophonia. The International Misophonia Foundation seeks to increase the development of research that respects the needs and dignity of those suffering with misophonia by facilitating and publishing original research, as well as offering institutions and individual researchers consultation services, publication assistance, funding opportunities, and ethical oversight. The IMF also seeks to raise awareness and understanding of misophonia through providing resources to educate sufferers, researchers, clinicians, and the public about how this disorder impacts individuals and families, as well as the best practices for increasing inclusion of individuals and families living with misophonia. Sorry. These were our 2023 to 2024 mission critical accomplishments and work. And as you can see, we have been doing a lot. This was pretty much our first full year of operations, so we tried to get as much done as we could during that time. And we facilitated research studies and surveys on misophonia, misokinesia, and sensory processing disorders. We have 3 completed studies ready for the next part of analysis. We developed books and materials related to misophonia. We hosted an online web conference. We provided a clinician directory for persons with misophonia. We're actively facilitating and promoting petitions that serve the misophonia, misokinesia, and sensory communities. We submitted our commentary to the active ICD proposal. We created an institutional review board for research. We created an academic journal for misophonia and developing guidance for the editors of the journal. We currently are proud to host misophoniainternational.com, which is a news, research, and article website. This does predate the IMF, but is now part of the IMF. A mix of free and paid webinars to provide education to clinicians, parents, teens, and adults with misophonia. We developed classes for clinicians, parents, and adults. We created resources for researchers, clinicians, and sufferers. We provided assistive technology for coping with misophonia, misokinesia, such as headphones, sensory regulation items, earplugs, and other useful tools for coping. We contacted developers of operating systems, gaming systems, software, websites, and other technology to advocate for more sensory-friendly design. We led a petition to ask Microsoft, Apple, and other industry leaders to implement changes for both misokinesia and misophonia. Apple has since created an option to remove the blinking text cursor array for those who choose to, which was a key part of the campaign. And we are still in active talks with Microsoft, Google, Affinity, and Canva at this time for more accessibility. We also consulted with other misophonia organizations and researchers. So 2025 is kind of only a few months in. So this is what we've done so far this year at kind of the halfway point. and we began drafting a proposal to submit to the APA for the addition of misophonia in the DSM. We also continue sharing our DSM and ICD petition. We published 3 guides for misophonia, a guide for clinicians, a guide for parents, and a guide for teachers. These are all free on our website. We published a free 90-page ebook based on my book, Misophonia Matters. On Amazon, it is 99 cents, but that is their processing fee. And on our website, it is 100% free. We published free worksheets on our website. We published a free coloring book for coping with misophonia, which, by the way, is based on sensory regulation. We contacted Steam, Canva, Adobe, Microsoft, Apple, Nintendo, and more about ongoing sensory considerations in their products. We continued testing products to review for the misophonia and sensory community. And in March 2025, we began work on a free misophonia support app, which is in the testing phase, so should be out within a month or 2. In March 2025, we received word from Microsoft that the blinking text cursor array has been removed from Edge and Teams on Mac, with more to follow. That issue does not exist for Microsoft software on Windows. And note, some of these topics will be repeated in my later presentation, but with a focus on relationships and misophonia. What is misophonia? Misophonia is an atypical neurological processing of audio and visual information. Misophonia is likely a neurophysiological disorder where otherwise non-aversive stimuli cause a fight, flight, freeze reaction. Research and understanding of misophonia are new in the grand scheme of neuroscience and psychology. The term misophonia was first coined in 2001 when audiologist Drs. Jastreboff and Jastreboff discovered that there was a differentiation in their practice between tinnitus, hyperacusis, and misophonia patients. It has been shown to be associated with altered brain activity in the auditory cortex and salience network, as well as having a brain basis, including the sensory motor system. So what is sensory processing disorder or sensory integration? In the 1960s, Dr. Jane Ayres described sensory integration, SID, including tactile defensiveness. In the 1980s, other scholars proposed that the defensiveness exists in other sensory channels, and several other types of sensory defensiveness were labeled and described. I do want to mention that sensory integration is still used by some communities, while others have used sensory processing disorder. And in the early 2000s, Dr. Lucy Jane Miller coined the terminology commonly used today. Sensory integration disorder is now often referred to as sensory processing disorder, which is an umbrella term with 3 primary diagnostic categories: A, sensory modulation disorder, B, sensory discrimination disorder, and sensory motor disorder. Each diagnostic category has subtypes. SMD has 3 subtypes: A, sensory overresponsivity, which would be closest to misophonia, B, sensory underresponsivity, and sensory craving. Persons can have SOR, SUR, and/or SC in one or more of the various sensory channels. Sensory channels include the following: auditory, visual, tactile, pain, olfactory, gustatory, proprioception, vestibular, air temperature, and interoception. Now, there is a scientific measure to find out if you have misophonia. This is a self-report test. There is no official diagnosis, but there is a scientifically validated scale for measuring. And measuring misophonia can be done with a self-report. Clinicians can help their clients to fill out this self-report, or it can be completed on its own. While misophonia is not currently in a diagnostic manual, the ability to engage in an assessment serves as a way to validate the concerns of sufferers and shows a scientifically centered result that represents the degree of impairment caused by misophonia. In all likelihood, more measures on misophonia will be developed as knowledge of the disorder spreads and more researchers become involved. To date, however, the most thorough, reliable, and valid measure that I have seen is the Duke Misophonia Questionnaire. While there are several subscales, to save time, I often focus on the page Trigger Frequency, which takes stock of an individual's triggers, as well as page 8 for impairment, which is the clinical subscale. The full DMQ is provided at that link. While this assessment does not serve as a diagnosis, it is an important part of understanding the condition and realizing that misophonia sufferers are not making things up, as well as showing that there's a significant degree of impairment that comes with the disorder. How to explain misophonia. It may be helpful to print off articles that explain misophonia. Since research is minimal, some of the websites listed at the end of this book can be helpful for learning about misophonia. If the person triggers you during the conversation, identify it, but not in an aggressive manner. Excuse yourself and explain that what they are doing is one of the things that causes a reaction. Politely ask if they can stop or if there is a way that they can adjust their behavior. Make sure they understand you are not blaming them, but that the condition is serious. Do not apologize for misophonia or make excuses. Say that this is a neurophysiological condition and that you have it. Be matter of fact and explain that unfortunately there is no cure. Discuss a way that you can let them know you are being triggered without being offensive or turning to anger. If the conversation starts to go sour or the person does not understand, excuse yourself. Do not let anger turn into a confrontation. Explain that you are merely explaining your feelings and that it has a huge impact on your life. Leave before it becomes more serious, since leaving is often a statement of its own. And obviously, each person is going to handle this differently, but this is just kind of a general idea of how I would handle it. And this is a script for explaining misophonia to strangers, and you can write it down on a pen and paper or a Word document, or just kind of think of it in your head. And the key to this exercise is to be polite and not put blame on the offending trigger. By asking for help and staying neutral when asking for accommodation, you are much less likely to anger the recipient of their request. In a perfect world, accommodations would be far easier to ask for, but in the world we do live in, it is important to mitigate frustration when explaining the disorder. And this is a sample script. Hello, excuse me, I'm sorry to ask you this, but would you mind not doing trigger here? I have a sensory disorder and it causes me distress. I would really appreciate it if you would be willing to help me. And you can explain misophonia in your description, or you could be more vague. That is completely up to you and what you're comfortable with. So explaining misophonia to people you see often is a bit more difficult. My recommendation would be to only explain misophonia for the first time when you are not triggered if possible. And you can bring the results of a misophonia assessment and/or accommodations list in letter form to the conversation. This can be very helpful in work, but can also be helpful in some doubtful families. And focus on the way the trigger makes you feel and the sound visual, not the person making the sound or visual. Acknowledge that accommodating misophonia can be hard and express gratitude when you are accommodated. Provide resources such as the printout guides on the IMF website, links to scientific articles, and other explanations that are formalized. Self-advocacy. The way we live our lives is the most effective means of enacting change that we have. Advocating for misophonia is simultaneously as easy as breathing and as hard as breathing while you have a chest cold. What I mean to say is that self-advocacy becomes a regular part of your day-to-day life, and yet it is exhausting and draining. Much of my coping with misophonia and self-advocacy is mundane. I return emails, ask my partner to please stop making noise or close his door, and slap on noise-canceling headphones when lawnmowers start outside my window. Coping and advocating go together. I advocate for myself so that I can cope better. When I let somebody know about misophonia or my needs, such as not shaking their leg or clicking their pen, I am self-advocating with the desire of coping. Initially, I became a misophonia advocate because I wanted to help others understand the condition. While I love helping people learn how to cope with misophonia, my initial purpose was to increase awareness so that I could more easily navigate the world around me. And here are just some potential misophonia accommodations. And wearing noise canceling earplugs is one, or headphones, sorry, earplugs, a private office and cubicle if possible, the ability to leave or take frequent breaks, the ability to work from school or home, the ability to work or do school from home, a job that allows for flexibility in hours, no eating in meetings, in waiting room situations, having a family member wait for you and text you when it's your turn, and using a delivery or ordering service to limit time in shopping environments. And that will obviously vary from person to person, and you should do what feels best for you or your family or your loved one. Learning your tolerance level. While there's no amount of being triggered by misophonia that is pleasant, most of us with the disorder have a level of stress and anxiety that we can handle before we go from fight, flight, freeze to a complete and utter sensory shutdown. Once we hit this level of tolerance, it can be difficult to bounce back, and some might even experience physical pain or flu-like symptoms. It is important to note that misophonia is worse when your overall stress and anxiety are bad. For example, when you are dealing with the loss of a loved one, school exams, or a work deadline, you are more likely to be triggered because you are not starting out at a baseline calm, but rather are already in a heightened state of arousal before there's even a trigger. I use my Apple Watch to track my overall heart rate and monitor my stress levels. While it's not an overly scientific measure, it is accurate enough to give insightful data on our fight, flight, freeze system. And you can really use any watch for that. And how I use it is I can tell what my baseline is of like 80. And if I get to 100, that means that I'm starting to get way too panicky. 110 is okay, we're at our absolute limit. And anything over 110 means I need to leave. And that gives me a physical way to see how I'm feeling and what my needs are. So, developing a mantra. Some people with misophonia find choosing a mantra for the misophonic moment to be helpful. The purpose of your mantra should be both distract yourself from the trigger and remind yourself that you are technically safe. For example, I am safe, this is not forever, I will be okay. It is the sound and visual causing this, I will be okay when it's over. I suggest writing your own mantra and make it as dramatic or as mundane as you want, whatever works for you. In conclusion, misophonia is difficult to live with, but there are coping skills that can help. More research is needed on misophonia, but for now, we know that it is likely a neurophysiological disorder and not psychological. Coping with misophonia depends on the individual's needs. The IMF continues to work toward our mission goals with your support. And for questions and answers, since those are not included here that were asked live, you can email me at shaylin@misophoniainternational.com, and I would be happy to respond with an answer if I am able, whether it's about this presentation or anything else that was discussed. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. We have 3 more videos for you to watch, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for joining us.